Well, guys, I ran into a problem with the custom ball diff setup. Differential seems perfectly fine, and I was just out running it on dirt, and it seemed to, perform really well. I noticed the car seemed to be slowing down rather quickly on the dirt, and I just kind of thought, oh, maybe it's because it's soft dirt today. It was real soggy when I'd walk on it, but over time, it seemed to get a little worse, and all of a sudden the transmission locked up. The gearbox locked up. And this gear here, which sits in front of the ball diff, was rubbing against the left side of the gear housing, and it actually kind of melted to it. And I can't remember exactly what the gear looked like here, but you can see it was rubbing. And I remember when I put it back together, it did seem to be fitting kind of strange. And I don't know if it was just kind of wearing out before I even did this modification or not, but when I put the C clip in place, the one that holds the shaft in place that that gear spin's on, it seemed to be fitting kind of weird. And this is the shaft that rolls on. But that C clip is this little one down here. And so I don't know exactly what went wrong, but you can see it definitely damaged the inside of the gearbox where it was rubbing. Had I run it on pavement, I probably would have noticed it was not right a lot sooner than ripping it on the dirt surface. So if any of you guys have gone ahead and ordered this, it's something you're going to want to pay close attention to, and there might be a easy workaround to it, but it was a problem for me. That looks all right as far as where the bearing seats, and then it's hard to get light in here. Hey guys, I want to thank everyone for the comments and the useful suggestions on how to make the gearbox here work better after I had the issue with I think this is called the counter gear here, rub against the side of the gearbox. I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is get a small O-ring to go around the shaft here and to provide a little bit of space between the counter gear and the gearbox. And I'll look for an O-ring that's the right size to go around the counter gear, but that's slightly smaller in diameter than the bearing, so it can push on the bearing in here as it needs to, so it doesn't make a plastic on plastic connection like I was having. I sanded off the rough areas on the gearbox housing, and then I took a polishing wheel on my Dremel tool, and I got it pretty smooth, and it looks like the damage is pretty minor. There was a little bit of damage to the hole where the bearing seats. Doesn't look like it wore through enough to compromise how the bearing fits in there. And then I had to sand the gear down to get rid of, what I had to do actually was take a screwdriver and push the plastic through each one of these teeth because it was folded over, kind of stuck in there. And then I sanded it down, which also sanded down this little nub here, which is supposed to provide the spacing and touch the bearing when everything's in good shape. Mine may well have been wore down before I started using this car over the past year or so. When I was a kid, I never had bearings in here. I only had bushings. So this must have been spinning on bushings for, many, many, many hours of use. And it may have wore this down some, enough that it wasn't providing this proper spacing. And then that in combination with the fact that the custom ball diff here is significantly wider than the stock differential. So what I'm also going to do is take this diff back apart. Again, it spins good on its own, so that's great. Originally, it was not spinning like it should. but in one of my previous videos, I went over how I fixed that. But at any rate, if I can get this thing out of here, what I plan on doing is on this side here, to provide a little bit more room for the counter gear to sit where it should. So I'm gonna take this metal, I'll take the diff apart again, and I'm gonna sand this down on a flat surface and just shave off like, you know, a millimeter or a very small amount, but just to give a little bit more wiggle room for that counter gear. And I think that in combination with the O-ring seated against this part of the gear here will hopefully provide the clearance it needs and then allow it to spin on the bearing. And we should be in good shape. I did a little driving when it's actually failed on a baseball field, and the car was doing great. The traction was noticeably better than the stock differential. Both tires would grab. In corners, I could kick the back end out instead of with the old setup, it would sometimes kick the back end out, but it was a lot tougher because sometimes just one tire would spin. And, you know, just like any open differential does. So that's where I'm at. It looks like that will hopefully work. If not, maybe what I'll look to do is, there's a couple of these on eBay right now, and I'll buy a new gear because mine was already probably wore down from bearings. I'm sorry, for bushings over the years. And then when it was spinning against the gearbox housing, it melted not only the outside part of the gear here, but this inner part was melted and disfigured. So I had to sand it. So I did lose, you know, a small amount of material there, a significant amount, be it small. So we'll see, but maybe the O-ring will provide just enough width to it, and all that in combination will get us where it needs to be. I was originally worried I might have led some folks down a bad path with this custom ball diff, but it looks like these are things that can probably be, you know, overcome. And this issue may have been unique to my car, or at least unique to cars that have wear on this counter gear. All right, guys, one more update. I'll make a comprehensive video combining a bunch of these shorter ones down the road, but just wanted to give an update what we got going on here. So what I did is I tried a few things. First, I tried to sand off the edge here on the diff spur gear, the white gear here on the left side of the car. I thought that was preventing the, oh, what's this one called here? The counter gear from sliding over to the right far enough. So I sanded that down a bit after taking the diff back apart. But once I did that, I noticed it's not the spur gear from the diff that's actually the issue. What the issue is, the metal housing down there was preventing this from, that's what's limiting it from moving further to the right. So I took my Dremel tool off and just took a tiny bit of material off the housing for the differential. And, you know, that bought me a fraction of an inch. And then on the counter gear, there's a little lip on the outside of the gear here. So I sanded that off as well, which bought me another fraction of an inch. And I'm not putting the E-clip in quite yet because I still need to source a O-ring. But if I hold it in sort of how the clip would, you can see now there is, well, easier said than done. But now there is a little bit of play. I can just push it here. And you can see I have play now. So I think that'll work well. The only issue is with my setup is because I did wear the plastic out when I had the rubbing issue. My counter gear is really wore down because I had to sand this. So, you know, the O-rings could really critical for mine. But for you guys that are trying to do this modification on your own for the first time, I think if you do what I did, and initially what I did was on the pinion, well, initially I started on this side to take some material off because it was binding a little bit in the gearbox, but that, best I could tell, made no difference. I started with that because it was easier. So then I took some material off here, and that helped. It fits in there nice now, and it rotates freely without touching the plastic at all. What I did this most recent time is because these two gears, when they're in the gearbox like this, as you can see, the white gear was not, I took off maybe a millimeter or so unnecessarily. Not that it should hurt anything, but as you can see, or probably can see, the housing here is what's actually preventing this from sliding over and getting the room I needed. So I went at an angle with my Dremel tool. I don't have the attachment here in front of me, but I basically went at it like this and went around as evenly as I could. It just took a little bit of material off, figuring it doesn't take much to buy me the room that I need. And then here on the spur gear, there was a little lip on the inside here that didn't seem to really have any structural significance. So I went ahead and took that off. And it looks like with all that, I should have the clearance I now need. And hopefully putting the O-ring on the shaft here will free up the room I need. So just put the O-ring right here, and it'll spin freely on the bearings, hopefully, at that point, once it's in the gearbox. Alright guys, I wedged 2 O-rings in here. I bought these, they seem to be a really good size. I remember 0.177 inches is 4.5 millimeters for my air gun. And the shaft is 5 millimeters, but I want it to stretch a little bit. I don't remember off the top of my head the math on this, but the inside diameter is 3/16, and it came out really close, so they're a good fit. And I needed 2 O-rings for mine because I sanded my thing down, my gear down. Now 1 might be enough if you have a gear that's not messed up like mine, but once I put the clip, you can see here, it should force that in. I'm pushing on the bearing, and I think I'll have some clearance there once I put that E-clip in. Well, hopefully this is it. Alright, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I took the diff out of the car again, turned it 180 degrees per an idea that one of my subscribers had, suggesting it might actually not rub like it does in the way I had it in there initially. And it's still, it's hard to see, still in contact there, so it doesn't seem to have made any difference, but it was definitely worth a try. And I think I'm going to put it back how I had it. And then I bought these Traxxas 5mm by 8mm. They're like a Teflon coated washer. They're a nylon or something, I don't know. They're flexible. Somebody had suggested that the O-ring may not be the best idea. And thinking it through, I guess if it got hot, maybe it would be more prone to failing over time. And how it actually seats on the bearing, because it's not flat, perhaps that could be a concern as well. I'm really not sure how much of a concern that would be, but the O-ring was the perfect size to fit on these bearings. However, it fits just inside there, and then the housing for the transmission seats on the outside here of the bearing, so it fits in there just right. But these Traxxas shims or washers, whatever you want to call them, they also fit in there just right. So I think they're good. I'm gonna try 3 of them if it'll fit. If not, I'll use 2. 3 is a little thicker than this O-ring, but the O-ring may well have been fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and try these washers out and put this thing back together. All right, I actually went ahead and used 4 of the shims, and as you can see, it's spinning nice and freely at the moment, and there's some space in here, and when I try to slide it back and forth, when I push it over, it's not touching the housing. So I think we got it here. I think this looks really promising, and there you can see there's still, the diff is still a little wider than the counter gear, but if you look down in there, because I shaped it off, there's no way it's going to touch the lip here on the housing.